Shepard was asking for it for three.
Well, he felt it, didn't he? He was begging.
Oh, what a play by Matt Mitchell.
To Watson, sees a lane, takes it underneath. Montana three.
This is a clinic. This is Aztec basketball.
Aztec Nation, what is up? It has been too long. It's been too long. This is the Aztec Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Tron, running solo today, and we're just going to jump right into the show, basically. I guess before we do, make sure to follow myself and the rest of the crew. You can find me at Blue Sky as well as other social media such as Facebook. I've been running TikTok a little bit lately, YouTube, all those places at Aztec Breakdown. You can find Austin at It's Austin Bolton. You can find Carly at Car McGee. You can find Kyle at Call Me Kinslow. You can find Jacob at Aztec Analytics. Make sure to follow the whole crew. We're all still around, just for any number of different reasons. We've all been really busy, basically. But I'm here today, so let's do a show. I want to start with a brief announcement. I am lucky and fortunate enough this year, for the first year in my life, I am going to Vegas for the March Madness basketball tournament. I will be getting there late Wednesday night, so I'm going to be missing the three early games on Wednesday, and then by extension all the women's games. Unfortunately, if I had my druthers, it would be let's go for every game, because why not? But I will still be there for the last 3 days of the men's games. Have the tickets for all of them. The flights are booked. Everything is set. Very excited about that. And the reason I bring it up is because if anybody else is going and wants to say hi, let me know. I'd love to be able to say hi to some of you guys. I remember when I went to Houston, actually getting to meet people like Austin, like Carly, like Kyle, face to face for the first time. I met FlyFit Jeremiah. I met a couple other people like Paul, formerly of East Village Times, right? So I met a number of people, and it was just awesome. So if anybody else would like to say hi, I would love to be able to say hi as well. But that's all there is about that. I will mostly just be watching the games. I don't do a lot of the stuff that most people consider fun, quote unquote. But with that, let's get into the actual show. And because it's been so long, I'm not going to take the time to go over just the last game specifically. I wanted to go over more slightly big picture stuff as a way to just catch up, because the last show I did was after the Colorado State game at home, where the Aztecs just demolished the Rams, and Miles Byrd went off and showed that he was like a pro prospect. So let's kind of just recap what's happened since then really quickly. And what's happened since then has been the team has struggled. They've been winning games by and large, but they have been struggling. And it's been unfortunate. Like, obviously, you like the win, but the metrics were tanking, and so that it just put them more and more on the bubble, even though they were winning games, because their metrics were getting worse. And the metrics are a big part of who gets to play in March. With that, it was a stressful time. I know it, you know it, everybody knows it. That being said, apparently something happened during halftime of the San Jose State game, and a lot of you have probably heard this already, but apparently the Aztecs, they're down by 17 to San Jose State, and I guess the story is Coach Dutcher went into the locker room and told his guys, like, don't give up, basically. And he said something along the lines of, if you trust the process, if you stay with it, I or we as the coaching staff will find something that works on offense. So you just have to keep believing. And then they left the room, and during that time, there was kind of a players-only meeting because the coaches were gone, and so the players had a meeting of sorts. And I guess during that meeting, Wayne McKinney called up Nick Boyd and said, you need to be more aggressive. And Nick Boyd has responded. I think he has been the number one catalyst of the current run, because since then the Aztecs came out of the half of that game and went on a 17-0 run to tie it. And then it was still a close game, but like it could have been a terrible loss. And instead it was a close win. And then after that, they beat Boise State at home convincingly, and then beat Fresno State at home very convincingly just last night as I'm recording this. I like using the phrase called up in terms of McKinney with Nick Boyd as opposed to called out. It's from, I want to say it's a Doc Rivers quote, where he says he doesn't call guys out, he calls guys up. And I always really like that. And so McKinney called Boyd up, and Boyd has responded. And let's get into that real quick. So I looked at the stats over the last 3 games, and just as a comparison, I compared them to the previous 3. And so for the Aztecs, the last 3, like I said, were on the road at San Jose State, home against Boise State, home at Fresno State. That's what we're looking at. And we're comparing it in Nick Boyd's case to the road loss against Colorado State, which was a tough one. I wasn't able to watch it live. I was listening on the radio, and it just sounded like the Aztecs had a number of chances. They took the lead at one point, and then they just couldn't pull it out, which happens against good teams. And make no mistake, Colorado State is a good team. But it was one of those games that felt almost, for me listening on the radio, it felt more like a game that the Aztecs lost as opposed to Colorado State winning. And maybe that's my home court bias, and that's fine. But so we're comparing the 3 games to the road game against Colorado State, the close win against Wyoming, which was much closer than it should have been because of the late game blow up, and then the close win at home against San Jose State. And so looking at the last 3, over the last 3 games, Nick Boyd has been averaging 20 points a game. Which is basically double his numbers from the previous 3. The previous 3, I think the numbers were like 10.3 points a game. And over the last 3, it's been 20 points a game. So he's doubled his scoring output. He has been getting a tiny bit less assist. He was averaging 4.7 assists a game in those previous 3, those 2 close wins and the loss to Colorado State. And he's been averaging 4.3 assists in the most recent 3 games. And so maybe he's passing it a little bit less, but that's well worth the trade-off. If you're giving up half an assist to score twice as many points, I think that's well worth the trade-off. And obviously ball movement is important, but it shows that he's still passing the ball very effectively. He just is being more aggressive with his own shot hunting and shot creation. His effective field goal percentage during that time has been 63%, which is very, very good. In the previous 3 games, it was only 38%, right? And what did strike me, what I did find interesting, is that Nick Boyd's deep shot still has been poor. He's been shooting 23% from deep over the last 3 games. But his 2-point percentage, which has been almost exclusively at the rim, he has been hitting some crazy finishes, right? And he's hit a lot of more simple ones too. He's just been getting there more because he's been more aggressive. But there have been times where the finishes have been very flashy, for lack of a better word. And so he's hitting those shots, and so his efficiency has gone up like crazy. During this stretch where he's been getting 4.3 assists, he's only had, I think, 1.3 or 1.4 turnovers a game. So basically a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which is also fantastic. And that's largely where the extra offensive production has come from over the last couple games, to be able to beat Boise State by 17, to be able to beat Fresno State by 23, right? Like, if Boyd is scoring twice as much, that's super helpful, especially when you consider, if you look at the losses, right? Colorado State was a 5-point loss. That's within the 10 extra points Boyd has been scoring. UNLV, that's further back, but that was an 8-point loss, right? That's within the 10 extra points Boyd is scoring, right? So, like, a lot of these games, if Boyd is scoring more efficiently, potentially that helps out. So that's been super encouraging to see. I am a little hesitant because of the scale of difficulty some of these shots at the rim he's been hitting have been, that it will be super sustainable. But hopefully there's a nice halfway point, right? Where if he's scoring 20 points a game on 63% effective field goal percentage now, but before he was getting 10 on 38, maybe he can get 15 on 55 or something like that, right? Where it's still above average. It's still better than he was kind of during this slump where the team wasn't playing very well. That seems more reasonable, I guess, of a goal as opposed to hoping he stays at this level. Now, obviously, if he stays at this level, fantastic. Nobody's going to complain about that. But just kind of tempering myself, I think, if nothing else, that I don't think this high of a level will be maintained, but hopefully he can stay at 70 or 80% of it, basically. Regardless, shout out to Nick Boyd for that. Shout out to Wayne McKinney for calling him up. Wayne McKinney also had a great game against Fresno State, playing more minutes than usual. BJ Davis started the game, but missed the vast majority of it. I think he played 2 or 3 minutes. It sounded like he was just sick, and so they sat him out. And hopefully he can get better because they're going to need him for this upcoming game against Utah State that we'll talk about in a little bit. The other key player I want to highlight in a positive way should be no surprise probably, and that's Magoon Gwath, right? Gwath has very much progressed during this freshman year, and he's been looking great. He's been impacting the game very well. I was on Blue Sky just the other day talking with a few people about the Defensive Player of the Year award and potentially the Freshman Player of the Year award, or I guess just Freshman of the Year award. And we were not even debating. We were all on the same side, but just, the consensus was like, Gwath should get both, honestly. He was, if I'm remembering correctly, he was 3rd in the conference in defensive player impact plus minus. He was 2nd in the conference in defensive Bayesian performance rating. He was 1st in the conference in defensive points over expectation. So these are, the first 2 are impact metrics. The second one is an efficiency metric, and he's top 3 in all of them. Those 3 are, in my opinion, kind of the best metrics to look at. And he's top 3 in all of them. Nobody else is really there. One other name that was brought up for Defensive Player of the Year was Nelly Jr. Joseph, which does make sense. New Mexico has a very good defense. I want to say top 30 in the nation. They're even 20th in the nation according to Torvik. So they have a very good defense. And Nelly Jr. Joseph is one of the 2 players who is above Magoon Gwath in defensive player impact plus minus, but it was by 2/100ths of a point per 100 possessions, so it's nothing, whereas Gwath is much farther ahead of Nelly Jr. Joseph in the other 2 metrics, and so for whatever that's worth, he has all that. I mentioned Magoon Gwath is at the rate he's going at, he will finish 1st in Aztec history, and I think by extension 1st in conference history. And I say conference history, it goes back to 2010, the 2010-2011 season. But 1st among Aztecs during that time, and I think among anybody in the conference during that time, of points prevented as measured by that defensive points over expectation. The current record holder is Xavier Thames, and Magoon Gwath is, I think, 4 points away. So if he prevents 4 more points than an average player would prevent in the given situations, then he ties Xavier Thames, and there are 5 games left to go, plus however many in the conference tournament, plus hopefully some in the March Madness tournament. So there's time, and these numbers can go down as well if he has a couple bad performances, obviously, but there's time, and if he continues at his pace that he's at, he will finish as the single season leader basically for that metric. So that just goes to show like he is deserving of that award. And then as just a cherry on top of all that defensive impact, which should give you a solid leg to stand on in terms of freshman of the year, I think. I don't think the fact that there's a defensive player of the year award means you get to ignore defense for all the other awards. I think it's hopefully something you're still considering. And on top of that, among freshmen, let me back up. On top of being basically the, if not the best, then the most impactful defensive player in the conference, on top of that, among freshmen, during conference play, he's also been the leading scorer. And so that points to his offensive impact as well. So obviously I'm biased. Obviously most of the people, the vast majority even of people listening to this are going to be biased because I'm guessing most of you are Aztecs fans and maybe there's a couple other randoms out there, which is fantastic. Thank you for joining. But despite that bias that I obviously have, it seems so clear to me that Guath should get both of those awards. I would understand to a certain extent the argument for a Nelly Jr. Joseph for Defensive Player of the Year. You could also go with True Washington would be a candidate for that. Mason Falslev leads the conference in steals right now, so he would be a natural candidate based off of the previous examples, the precedent that's been set on that award basically. But Guath seems like the best candidate to me for both those awards. I had some stats. I'll go over them pretty quickly here, just to try and highlight Guath's improvement. And for his, I didn't do the same 3-game samples that I did with Boyd. I wanted to look at the whole season to get a bigger sample. And so I looked at his first 10 games and then his last 14 games that he's played. And because of the way the conference season worked out this year, that's not as clean of a breakup as like the non-conference versus the conference, the way it might have been in past years. So I wanted to highlight that. So these numbers would be slightly different from what you would see if you looked at just like conference numbers, for example. But in the first 10 games, Guath averaged 7 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, 3.5 blocks a game, and shot 52.7% on his effective field goal percentage, which is just better than regular field goal percentage, which is why we use it. Those are okay numbers. Those are very much, he's a freshman. The blocks are obviously impressive, and that's something we had talked about before. But those are okay numbers. Those are very much, he's a freshman, he's learning his way. Those will do type of numbers, except for the blocks, which is like why he gets his time basically at that point. Over the last 14 games, these numbers have improved. His points have gone from 7 points a game to 10 points a game. His rebounds have gone from 4 rebounds a game to 7 rebounds a game. Those are both very nice developments to me. His blocks have gone down. They went down from 3.4 to 2.2. I think there's a number of reasons for that make it so that I'm not worried about that in the slightest. Number one, guys are going to be less aggressive as they get the tape on him and see, oh, he can actually block this. And people start making decisions and get more conservative with their shots when he's around, right? So that's part of it. Part of it, I also think, has been Guath being more selective with what he tries to block, which is something that myself and Kyle and Austin were all calling for earlier in the season, because he would go and try and get a block, and sometimes he would get it, sure, and other times he wouldn't, and it would give up offensive rebounds to the opponent, and they would get scores that way. Whereas now he's been more, you can definitely tell, he's been more selective in what he's trying to swat away. And as a result, he's in better position to get more rebounds, as evidenced by his rebounds going up from 4 over the first 10 games to 7 over the last 14 games. And then he's scoring more points, like I said, and he's done that on more efficiency as well. His efficiency has gone up about 6 points, from 52.7 to 58.5 in terms of effective field goal percentage. So basically everything is an improvement. The one thing that doesn't look like an improvement, because the blocks are going down, 1 is still an elite number, and 2, it's an improvement because it will help the team out, right? It's one of those, like I said, the individual stats look slightly worse in that regard, but in terms of the team impact, it helps out more. And so that's a sacrifice that I would be willing to make if I'm like the coach, right? And as a fan, it's one that I am okay with. So shout out to Magoon Gwath for that as well. I have no clue what his draft stock might be. Just as a quick aside, I have looked up once or twice over the course of the year, and people have been noticing him more for sure. It seems like from the few times I've looked that the prognosticators, for whatever their opinion is worth, they wouldn't be ready to pull the trigger quite yet. His size is very intriguing because you can't teach 7 feet, and his ability to block shots is very intriguing, and then the flashes he's shown shooting the ball is very intriguing as well, right? Having a 7-foot player who can defend the rim and also hit 3-point shots, that's something that's super valuable in the NBA. So there's intrigue there for sure. At this point, with 5 games left, I wouldn't think he would be getting enough draft hype to confidently be like, yes, I'm going to leave for the NBA. So there's that. Now, anything can happen. Everybody's different. There would be other reasons besides the NBA to leave school early. But I wouldn't think that if he leaves, I don't think it's because somebody's like, we promise we're drafting you in the first round type thing. And there might not even be a promise of a second round. It might be like, if you fall to us, we'll draft you in the second round. Potentially, I could see that. So those are things to keep an eye on. NIL is a whole different monster. I am hopeful that these guys are doing enough to be willing to sacrifice potentially a little bit of money from a bigger name program to be able to stay here and do something special next year. That's kind of the hope. The hope is that if somebody leaves, they're leaving for, if not the NBA, then a pro opportunity as opposed to more money at another school. And we'll see. The Players Era Festival hopefully helps with that. I know guys like John Schaefer and Coach Dutcher and everybody are always talking about, like, make sure you're contributing to Mesa. There's only so much we can do, but it just is what it is. Ziegler was talking about how guys are kind of starting to sense like the grass might not always be greener. Like if you have a good situation, leaving a good situation for more money might not be worth it. And it's just, at that point, it's a matter of how much more money, right? And we could go off on a tangent on that. I'll get away from that, but the short version is shout out to Gwath for improving so much, and let's not let fear about him leaving next year taint our enjoyment of what we're watching right now, I think is the short version of that. Lastly, the last player I want to talk about is Miles Bird. And Miles Bird, unfortunately, has been almost like the anti of these last two players, right? With him, I did do the 3-game versus 3-game sample, and his sample got actually worse. It's still not bad, but over the past 3 games, he's been scoring 9 points a game. He's been getting 4 rebounds, which is solid. He could get more, but also based off his play style, that's probably fine. He's been getting 2 assists. He has been getting 3 steals. That's very good. But he's been shooting, his effective field goal percentage is 48.5, essentially 46%, which is not great. You definitely want to be above 50. Like 50 is kind of the average. Even 51 or 52 can sometimes be kind of the average. So you definitely want to be above 50, and he's down at 46. That's not an efficient scorer offensively, generally speaking. When you're looking at effective field goal percentage, there are a few things that can change that to make it so that maybe it's okay. Those 2 things would be how often do you turn the ball over and how often do you get to the free throw line. If you never turn the ball over and you're getting to the free throw line a lot, then maybe you can still be an efficient scorer with that low of an effective field goal percentage. But Bird doesn't really fall into either of those categories. He gets to the line some, and he doesn't turn over the ball over a super lot, but neither of those are enough to make up for that poor percentage. On top of that, a large part of that percentage has been fueled by him shooting 17% from three-point range over the last 3 games, which is just atrocious, and it's so different. This team has cooled off from deep so much compared to where they started, and it's a shame. It's been great that they've been able to, over the last 3 games, find ways to score despite maybe not shooting the best from deep. Hopefully that's something that comes back. Sometimes these things come in waves. Sometimes if you're like a stats nerd, it might just be statistical variance, right? And they kind of started off hot and now they're like really cold, and hopefully they kind of come back out and level out, or even better, get hot again. That would be the hope. But Miles Bird has been slumping lately. I have no clue how that might affect his draft stock either, or his NIL opportunities. Obviously, he was getting looked at earlier in the year as high as a mid to late first round pick. Honestly, I didn't see too much like mid. It was all, I think the highest projection I saw for him was maybe 25 or 26 or something. So it was late first round, but still, like, if you're getting looks in the late first round, then you're likely to be taken in the draft at some point. And you couldn't fault a guy for going even in the second round. Most second rounders still get guaranteed contracts. It's just a 2-year contract instead of a 4-year contract. So that's the thing. I don't know how the last 3 games or even the last 6 games, because the 3 before that weren't very good either. They were just slightly better. I don't know how that might affect his draft stock, or his NIL stock, I guess, for lack of a better word. My hope, and I haven't been shy about this all year, is that basically everybody comes back. You'll have the few players graduate. You'll have Wayne McKinney graduate. You'll have JCJ graduate. Why do I feel like there's one more? Kimo Ferrari will graduate, but I don't even think he's on scholarship. Am I missing somebody? Who am I missing? Nick Boyd doesn't graduate. I'll figure it out later. But anyways, the people that graduate. Everybody else hopefully comes back. You get Reese Waters back. It seems like I haven't heard anything specific about him lately, other than that he has been like, he's out of the boot and he's been kind of practicing to a certain extent. But it very much seems like at this point, why even come back? Like, even if you were ready for Utah State on Saturday, I'm recording this on Thursday, even if you're ready for Utah State on Saturday, that's 5 games and then hopefully 3 in the Mountain West tournament. And then if everything goes right, you get guaranteed 1 in March Madness, and that's it. So you would get at most, if you would add 6, right? So at most you'd get 14 games, but that's not happening. Like, that's the Aztecs going all the way to the national championship again. That's not happening. And so you're closer to 9, maybe 10 games. And at that point, I'm not sure if it's worth it. And that's something, if he comes back, great. It's Austin and I have said before, we're fans, we support it. If it was me, I don't know if I would do that. It might be worth it to just stay another year in school and get a higher degree and actually get to play a full year. That would be my hope, ultimately, for the future. Bird comes back, Guath comes back, Boyd comes back, you get Reese Waters, you get in another big man with experience, and run it back and do something special next year. I am ranting. I'm just excited to be here, y'all, so I appreciate you just going along with my tangents. Let's look at the conference standings. So, as it stands right now, San Diego State is in third place for the conference standings, is how I understand it. I guess they're tied for third place. I'm not fully brushed up on what the tiebreakers are for the tournament. What I do know is that the team they're tied for third place with is Colorado State. One of the tiebreakers at some point on the line is just your head-to-head matchups. They went 1-1. I don't know if the point spread in those matchups matters. That might be like the very last tiebreaker or something, but I don't even think it is. But they went 1-1, and then it would be, I'm pretty sure the tiebreaker after that is your record against the top teams. And so, for example, if Colorado State has lost to New Mexico twice, which I think they have. I'm trying to pull it up here real quick. Lost to New Mexico. Yeah, they lost to New Mexico twice. So if San Diego State was to beat New Mexico in 2 games from now, this upcoming Tuesday, and Colorado State went 0-2 against New Mexico, then San Diego State would get the tiebreaker. They would get the 3rd seed for the tournament. So there's that to consider. But even before that, just looking at the standings, not so much the seeding, but the standings. San Diego State is currently tied for 3rd. They are behind Utah State and New Mexico. New Mexico took its 2nd loss in conference last night against Boise State. So Boise State kind of did potentially everybody a solid, honestly, by finally giving New Mexico their 2nd loss of the season. So New Mexico's 14-2. Utah State's 13-3. San Diego State's 11-4. San Diego State plays Utah State on Saturday, and then they play New Mexico on Tuesday. If San Diego State were to win both of those games, they are now 13-4. Who knows what Colorado State might do in that time? But Colorado State's the only one who could be like coming up from behind, I guess, and it would just be staying tied. But so San Diego State would be 13-4. Utah State at that point would be at least 13-4. They might be like 14-4. I'm not looking at their schedule, but they would just presumably have 2 games in that time too. New Mexico would have another loss, so they would be at least 14-3. And you're just looking at the loss column, right? So New Mexico would still be a game ahead of San Diego State and Utah State at that point, and San Diego State and Utah State could be tied for 2nd at that point, which would mean for the Aztecs to be able to get the regular season conference title, New Mexico would have to lose 1 additional game. So they play San Diego State, and mind you, like I said, this game against New Mexico is on Tuesday. New Mexico doesn't play between now and then. So they played Boise State on Wednesday night, and then they have a week off basically until Tuesday where they play San Diego State. It is in Viejas. San Diego State is favored, according to Bart Torvik, by 1.5. But we'll have to see what happens, right? Because New Mexico has been absolutely killing it all conference season. But let's say San Diego State pulls it off. New Mexico will still have to lose 1 more game. And on top of that, San Diego State would have to go undefeated the rest of the season, right? Like San Diego State, if they want a shot at the title, basically they need to win all 5 of their last games. Bart Torvik has the odds of that happening at 5.6%. So it's long odds. That schedule, let's just go over it real quick. So you're at Utah State. That's the hardest one of all of them. That's this Saturday on the road against Utah State. Utah State already beat the Aztecs at home. It was a close one. The Aztecs got out to a huge lead, and then Utah State came back and won it by 1. Bart Torvik has Utah State favored by 6 points, so that's going to be the hardest one. New Mexico's no slouch either. That's the game after Utah State, and then after that is on the road at Wyoming. Once again, no slouch. The Aztecs they were solidly ahead of Wyoming until the late game collapse. That wasn't even like so much playing. It was a little bit of playing, but it was the foul a 3-point shooter, technical during those free throws, and then foul a second 3-point shooter, right? That gave Wyoming an 8-point possession. So without that, that's like a 10, 11, 13-point win. So it looked closer than it was, but also this will be at elevation in Wyoming. This Wyoming team isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, especially at home, so that's not an easy win. Then road game against UNLV, and sure, Vegas, contains Viejas East, and so there's that, but also UNLV beat the Aztecs in the actual Viejas, so not an easy game. And then Nevada at home, and the Aztecs did beat Nevada on the road, which was fantastic. It was one of the better games they've played all season. So there's that, but still I don't think you can be optimistic and even relatively confident in that one. The Aztecs seem to match up well against Nevada because Nevada doesn't have any super great ball handlers. but Nevada does still have talent. So the point being, there's a reason why Torvik says there's a 5.6% chance of the Aztecs winning out. On top of the Aztecs winning out, New Mexico has to lose, but just the Aztecs winning out means New Mexico's lost one additional game. They would then have to lose to one of either Air Force, which is in Albuquerque, Nevada in Reno, or UNLV in Albuquerque. And those games, like, New Mexico should wipe the floor with Air Force. Honestly, they're favored by almost 30 points in that one. And granted, anything can happen, but you would expect them to. You would expect them to pretty much dominate UNLV. Reno would be the only maybe one, and they're still favored in that game. And if I was a betting man, I would bet on New Mexico to win. They've just been so dominant all year. So with all that in mind, it's slim odds for the Aztecs to get all that would get them a share of the title, and Torvik has that happening. There's a 3.6% chance that San Diego State gets a share of the title, and just for what it's worth, Torvik has a 0.3% chance of San Diego State getting the sole title, right? Just a solo, like nobody, the record isn't tied with anybody. San Diego State is in clear first place. There's no ties. 0.3% chance. 3.6 of a shared title, probably with New Mexico, would be the assumption there. The odds aren't looking great, unfortunately. Still possible, but not looking great on that front, which then turns to the seedings. I wanted to bring up the seedings. I have in the past shared, and I'm sure I'll share it at some point as we get closer to the tournament, but I have in the past shared just a little image I have of the tournament odds for the Mountain West based on your seed. And that all that is literally just counting. There have been 11 Mountain West tournaments since the current format started, and how many of those 11 times did the one seed get to X amount far, right? How many times did they make the semifinals? They automatically make the quarterfinals, so that's 100%, right? How many times did they make the semifinals? How many times did they make the championship game? How many times did they win the championship, right? It's 11 years is a pretty small sample for this type of thing, but I'm sure I'll be sharing it again. I ultimately, outside of making sure you're in the top 5, I don't think it matters all that much what seed you are. It's probably, if anything, a little bit more about matchups than anything else. And outside of being in the top 5, I think you just want to win all the games in the regular season, right? Like, Aztecs win out and let the chips with New Mexico fall where they may, and if you get a title, great, and if not, great. But just for reference, the 1 seed has won the championship. Out of the 11 years, the 1 seed in the Mountain West tournament has won the championship 4 times. The 2 seed has also won it 4 times. The 3 seed has never won it. The 4 seed has won it once. The 5 seed has won it once. And the 6 seed has won it once. And the 6 seed was last year with New Mexico doing it, which blew my mind because of just the wear and tear that puts on your body to win 4 games in 4 days when the top 5 seeds are only playing 3 games in 3 days. It was very impressive of them to do that. So shout out to them for that, but that's for what it's worth. You basically, historically speaking, you want to be in the top 2 seeds to have a good chance at winning the tournament. There could be any number of explanations for that. The talent is going to be definitely probably the biggest part. Every year it gets brought up, that the 1 seed plays, the first game on Thursday, so they have the longest rest time until the second game until the first game on Friday, and then they have, just a few hours extra compared to whoever their opponent is for the championship game. They have a few hours extra of rest. I don't know how much I buy into how much of an impact those hours have. It's definitely, you would prefer to be in that state of having those few extra hours as opposed to not having them, sure, but I don't know how much of an impact that has, but just for what it's worth, if anybody's interested in that, that's what it is. And I can share that graphic out on the socials. All that in the end leads us to the March Madness projections. I like to use Bracket Matrix. The one downside about Bracket Matrix is, actually, let me back up. If you don't know what Bracket Matrix is, just on the off chance, Bracket Matrix is just a website that takes all the different bracket projections from a number of different outlets and updates them. It updates its matrix daily, and it just will say, this team was this seed in this bracket, and they were this seed in this bracket, and averages it all out. And it makes just a good way of measuring just the average placement for where a team might be, right? Because you might look at ESPN and be like, oh, well, they aren't that good because they got this wrong or whatever. And then you might look at CBS and be like, well, they aren't that good because they got this other thing wrong. But then when you average them out, it makes a slightly more accurate projection, right? Right now, as I'm looking at this, on February 20th, there are 103 brackets that were surveyed for the current projections. The Aztecs showed up in all 103 of them, which is a great sign. Most bracketologists, the vast majority of them, will get, out of the 68 teams in the field, they will get at a minimum 67 of them right, if they know what they're doing, right? I say this as someone who's not a bracketologist, who doesn't necessarily know what they're doing in that regard, but it's from what I understand, just listening to them talk all the time, like getting the right teams in isn't necessarily the hard part, except for maybe that very last one, right? 67 out of 68 is to be expected. If you're getting less than that, you need to really back up and figure out what you're doing wrong. The tricky part is, what seed do they get on, right? Getting it on the exact right seed, that's great. Getting it within 1 seed line, that's solid. Getting it within 2 seed lines is okay, but that's, at that point, you're kind of far off. So that's the tricky part, and that's really the part that the ones that know what they're doing really focus on. So I bring that all up to say, if the Aztecs are in all 103, that's a very encouraging sign that everybody agrees they're in. Even though they're on the bubble, everybody agrees they're in. You can compare this to BYU right now. On the bracket matrix is actually ahead of the Aztecs in terms of their placement, but they aren't on every bracket. They're on 102 of the 103. Or Texas is on 100 of the 103, even though they are also above San Diego State. So there's a little bit of debate about those two, which makes sense. But San Diego State is in all 103, so that's great. Now, the downside is San Diego State is currently in bracket matrix an 11 seed. They're the top 11 seed in the matrix, but they are an 11 seed, so they are not seeded well just in general, because you don't want to be that low, generally speaking, right? Just means you're going up against a 6 seed, which is going to be a pretty good team. So that's where they stand right now, is in that 11 seed range. If they went out, who knows what happens? Like I said, I'm not a bracketologist, but I could see them, if they went out, getting up to a 9 seed or an 8 seed. It might be worth it to wonder. You wouldn't want to lose the games, obviously, but it might be worth it to wonder, would it be preferable to be a 10 seed as opposed to a 9 seed? Because that first round matchup isn't really going to be any harder, but the second round matchup, playing a Texas A&M or a Wisconsin, even though those are fantastic teams, would be easier than playing an Auburn or an Alabama, right? So that could be a fun discussion for people to have at some point in time. But right now, looking at that 11 seed, maybe in the 10 seed range, but that's kind of where they're at. If they being the Aztecs, if they lose to either Wyoming or maybe even to UNLV, I mean, UNLV should be a quad 2 game. If they lose to Wyoming, though, it's a quad 3 loss, they might fall out, honestly. They need to keep winning. You can lose to Utah State on the road, and I think you're okay there. If you lose to Utah State and you lose to New Mexico, that's getting a little scary. That you might be okay if you win the last 3, but like, hopefully they don't put us through that. If you beat Utah State, I think you can then lose to New Mexico. I think that's fine at home, just in terms of March Madness seeding. But I think you can lose to Utah State and be okay, but that's basically the only one. If you lose to Wyoming, that's very bad. If you lose to UNLV, you might be okay. I mean, some of it would also depend, like, if you beat Utah State and New Mexico, at that point you could drop a game to either UNLV or Nevada and be okay. I don't think even if you win both Utah State and New Mexico, you can drop a game to Wyoming. Even on the road, that's just going to look really bad. So that's like the one game to have circled is don't lose to Wyoming, and we will see what happens. And I will once again stress, I'm not a bracketologist. That's just how I would imagine that going. That the bad losses really hurt you more than the good wins help you, is my understanding. And Wyoming would be a quad 3 loss. That's going to hurt. And despite beating Houston on a neutral and beating Creighton on a neutral, and at the moment, even like the Nevada game on the road is a quad 1. The Boise State game on the road is a quad 1. Those are big wins. But like they're on the bubble in large part because they lost to UNLV at home. That was a quad 3 loss, right? So these even just a quad 3 loss can really, really tank you. And I'm not sure the Aztecs' current resume could withstand another one. I could be wrong because New Mexico, I think, has like a quad 4 loss even, and they are higher in the bracket. They also have just one more games though, so it gets tricky. But that's where I'm at. Circle that Wyoming game especially. Circle all of them. Just go undefeated, and if they go undefeated, they'll be fine. But that Wyoming game is going to be a crucial one. And with that, Aztec fans, I think that does it for this one. It ended up being longer than I thought it would be, but hopefully not a terrible length. But yeah, with that, thanks for listening. I appreciate you all. Hope to see some of you in Vegas if you're willing. And go Aztecs.
On the floor, it's Butler with 2 seconds. He's got to put it up. And he wins it with the jumper.
Mitchell's feeling it. Now he's feeling it even more. What it do, Matt Mitchell. Shackle to Flynn for the win. It's good! Oh, Malachi Flynn! On the rim.
2 to go. Butler has to put it up for the win. Butler sticks it at the buzzer. And a steal. Darion Trammell will coast in for the layup.
Franklin with 2 seconds forces the shot. It's good. The Aztecs advance. They've won it on the shot by the player of the year.
Miller, he put it behind his back. It's taken away by Butler. Lob it up. Lob it down. Big finish. Keyshawn Johnson.
Now we have tasted it. We're coming back. We're coming back.